Today is the last program. You can watch the previous 3. They all are available in the video gallery. So we covered basic anatomy and neurophysiology to make sure you understand the basic terms, different parts of the brain that I will refer to. We covered alpha brainwaves very thoroughly during our second webinar. Then last time we covered beta and theta brainwaves. So they are already added to the video gallery. And then today we are going to talk about delta and gamma brainwaves. So to start with, as usually, I like to refresh quickly what we covered previous time. And this is my own summary, which I'm proud of in some way, because I am trying to pick out the key words, the key processes, and basically put them on one slide as a reminder. And I found that I can only do it after I do the presentation to you, because it really helps, for all this information to settle in my own mind. So what I came up with for beta, I call it beta keywords. So it's executive functional output. And to be able to produce this output, of course, we need to process and integrate cortical representations to be able to assess all this incoming stimuli from inside, from outside, and make the decision of what's next. So after that, or in parallel sometimes, beta will be responsible for preparation of this output. Output will be not necessarily just thinking, mental activity, but it could be movement as well. It's preparation for action, control, and execution. And it implies that there will be resources collected, getting ready, available for the task at hand for this output. So it means we inhibit what we don't need and we excitate task-specific areas. And then the one most mystical one that you may see, the status quo. For myself, I explained it as mechanism for sustaining voluntary control or goal-directed action. So beta also helps you to kind of stay focused on what is. And there is one little interesting thing there. If you think of beta metaphorically as beta is our small ego, our small separate self, yeah, beta does work in a way that it tries to kind of sustain the present. And yeah, that's how our mind works. We always try to hold on to what we already know. And sometimes we become very stubborn in that, ignoring that the outside world is adapting, changing, but we are refusing to see the reality and the depth. So this would be the abnormalities. And yes, if we look at abnormalities of beta, something like obsessive compulsive behavior would be like very strong, stuck beta. And we do have to remember that to function properly, efficiently, we need flexibility. And for beta especially, it's important to get involved into the right action, kind of make the right assessment and get involved into the right action, and then switch off, reset all activities. There is no brain power lost because all beta activity will be quite kind of energy consuming. And then once again, we have rolandico-central, which is about motor function, action preparation and execution, frontal beta, cognitive function, stimuli assessment and decision-making involved in preparation for action. Then vertex beta will be, it's the very top of the head, it's CZ, top-down control, inhibition, conflict resolution, impulse control. So kind of the highest of the human functions of inhibition of animal behavior. And then, of course, we have also occipital beta, which is involved in visual processing and our orientation in external space. And then a special feature, we have to remember that beta acts as a reset operation and always have this kind of rebound effect to clear sequences of strong activation after action. So if not cleared, there will be signs of hyperactivation or irritation. And in my own simple words, processing the input and allowing the output, stimuli assessment, thinking, acting, moving, organizing behavior. So that's in one line. Then the next brainwave category we looked at last time was theta. So it's a low frequency rhythm associated with internalized thoughts. So if beta is externalized more, this is beta is always what we are aware of. Theta is, yes, internalized. So that does kind of correlate with what we say in the mind mirror theory with the subconscious. Yeah, obviously, when we get to this stage, it will be trance-like state, hypnagogic. In hypnosis, we see theta. I also should add how I understand it's more like you are more present when you are in theta and gives you this depth of attention and presence. So for me, again, theta keywords are attention, task performance, and memory. We keep in mind that theta will reflect a limbic system. Emotion discrimination, so we select from the stimuli the ones which are relevant and important and salient. Mainly the keyword would be salience. And thus it relates to motivation and behavior. Emotions, yes, fear and impulsivity will go from the same source. Then it's responsible for spatial exploration and navigation. And I guess if we switch on our logical brain, we can explain that too, because this is our memory and it kind of keeps the maps of the places we've been, not just the time, but the place. So it gives this kind of internal memories. That's why whenever we explore, navigate, it will, again, stay in touch with those. So hippocampus is involved in that. And then executive task performance, I already mentioned maths as an example. Working memory and long-term memory mechanism, yes, because the coding of memory is being processed, as we know, in hippocampus, and that's theta. And obviously all together, selecting the relevant information, being able to hold this information, encode information for further use, for long-term memory, will contribute to our learning abilities. So kind of everything, whatever I mentioned, I think becomes very logical. Again, in my own words, I was thinking of this metaphor for theta. Some of you may be surprised when somebody says that your inner world is the reflection of the outer world. So I guess theta to me would be the confirmation that this is true and this takes place, because that's how we encode. So we just basically see what we see, experience what we experience, and then whatever was relevant, important, highly energetically charged to us stays imprinted or encoded in our memory. Of course, even more things stay imprinted, but consciously it's easier for us to get access to those stimuli that were high charged. Theta will be responsible for internal and external spaces navigation, or orientation adaptation mechanism to match inner world with the outer world. By that, I mean just ability to learn, really. You compare everything that you learned before, what's in your memory base, with what you're exposed to in the present moment, and you adjust your actions accordingly. So thus it helps you to adapt and organize your behavior. So yeah, hold relevant information to perform better, adapt behavior based on past mistakes. So I guess, sorry if it's a bit muddled up, but I think the slide itself should help you to get the very gist of theta. We are looking at delta now as we see it with the mind mirror. And once again, with the mind mirror, we see brain waves not as waves, wriggly waves. We see them in a more simplified presentation as bands. So delta will be the slowest band we'll see. It's 4 to 0.5 hertz. It's in the very bottom of the pattern that we see, usually in purple. The pattern that you see right now on the screen corresponds to channeling, or otherwise also called a trance pattern. And it's also associated with deep, deep sleep, or as we know, this deep pattern is common for all the psychics and mediums and healers when they are in like active process of what they are doing. So let's kind of clarify that. So in the mind mirror theory, we associate delta with personal unconscious mind and see it as a doorway to universal consciousness. I also say it's like if theta, your memory, will be your computer memory, but when you can't find information or files that you need within your computer, inside yourself, you start Googling the internet. So delta, I sometimes call cosmic internet. So you get out and go there to search for either information or energy, right? Because we know that the healers, they just channel, basically. They channel the healing energy. It's not theirs, they are more the mediums for it. I highly recommend everyone to watch my presentations on mediums, because that will give you a better understanding of how delta operates in mediums. And there was one example I gave where the medium was coming in and kind of not the medium coming in, but he was opening up. So he was more like getting out with his own individual mind and letting another mind, another spirit to come in and channel. And we saw that delta opening was preceding that kind of electric shift and beginning of channeling and the end of channeling. And also there is a beautiful presentation by Judith about mainly healers, summarizing her over 30 years of research about healing. So again, highly recommend, because that will give you more idea about delta function. So besides that, in normal world, we all express delta in deep, restorative, dreamless sleep. And then delta is common for empathy or hypervigilance. So I should see them as like different spectrums, so to say, where the human can be kind of lowest level, so to say. It will be the instinct where you have to defend and make sure your basic survival needs are satisfied, and you look out for that. That's hypervigilance. Am I safe? And then on the highest end would be empathy and compassion, where you are able to basically open up and embrace it all for, you know, yourself and for others, all the world, with all the pains and struggle and all the dualities that we have to face being in this world. Here I made a note. Delta is instinctual radar that scans the environment and physically picks up information and energy. Yes, this is true. So, okay, that was, I think, enough for how we see delta with the mind mirror. And now let's see the summary slide that I prepared for delta and how delta is seen in clinical world. Once again, it was discovered in 1930s by Gray Walter. He improved Hans Berger's machine and discovered delta. So as we know, delta is slowest and highest amplitude brainwaves. And here maybe a good association would be to mention radio waves. As we know, FM stations would be more local, and AM stations would travel longer distances, even across countries. So delta, the slowest wave, will be like that. It's the one traveling long distances, and so to say, connecting you and the source of all, you and the creator, if you like, you and cosmic internet, if you like. Delta is intermittent frontal, temporal, and occipital. It rarely is seen in healthy waking adult EEG. It's mainly prominent and normal during sleep. So the key role there goes to cholinergic, the main neurotransmitters of our parasympathetic system. So I just simplified, call them relaxing. As you know, reticular activation system sitting in the brainstem will regulate our normal wake and sleep cycles. So the messages sent from there through these cholinergic projections will regulate whether we are awake or asleep, thus contributing to generation of delta. So state, it will be deepest levels of relaxation. So sometimes just delta, if all other brainwaves are off, can be seen in yoga nidra practitioners. Healing slow wave sleep stage, it's restorative sleep. Again, I'll just give you a metaphor that it looks like we go into, if beta is most consuming energetically and busiest information processing. So here it's almost like we go into energy saving mode, so to say. We switch off all energy consuming centers of the brain, and we use this energy for restoration, for healing, to kind of clean up and restore default settings of self-regulation in our body. That's kind of my summary. And we'll speak, of course, in more detail throughout the lecture today. Stage 3 of sleep will show around 20% of delta, and stage 4 of sleep will show more than 50% of delta. So yeah, delta is dominant in this deep, deep sleep. Origin, again, cortical thalamic, and delta dominates in the EEG when the cortical areas are disconnected from the corresponding thalamic nucleus. So I just said that the conscious centers, the most energy consuming thinking centers, will be disconnected, and movement centers as well. As we know, beta is not just thinking, it's also motor function. So if you remember, cortical thalamic projection was mentioned for alpha. If for alpha, this cortical thalamic projections will relate more to depolarization state of neurons. Delta will be referred to hyperpolarization, and again, we'll talk about it later, but hyperpolarization, it's, as we know, the membrane potentials, they change. So what happens, the charge is depolarized, then repolarized, and then it gets just below the line where it gets hyperpolarized. So it gets so low, so it can't be excited. It needs just restoration time to reset back to its original threshold of -70. So I'll talk about it again a little bit later, just to refresh and remind you and give rough idea. And then function, of course, as sleep is about discharging from the day of what you picked, information and energy discharge. Of course, it will be part of memory formation as well, transferring your learning and memories into long-term memory storage. That's what happens during sleep. Then metabolism would represent energy recharge to help the body heal and recuperate. And as we know, we always tell kids that they grow in their sleep. And this is absolutely true, because I guess the energy during the day is used for output and execution. The energy at night will be used to help your body reset and help your body grow. Reward function, that's something which is extremely interesting, and we'll cover it in more detail later. So it is related to dopamine pathways. Dopamine is this neurotransmitter, which is like the messenger, which is passing the messages and performing its function, letting us feel what we feel, is responsible for anticipation of satisfaction and pleasure, and is well known, in normal and addictive behaviors. Again, delta is ultra slow, as you can see. The picture here to the left will show EEG diffused slowing. So almost across all sides, you can see these slow waves. of delta activity with some imposed beta activity on top of each delta wave. Somebody else's snapshot of where we see delta activity being generated. It will be referred to as thalamocortical or cortical reorganization of waking circuits. The thalamus cholinergic projections are critical to the generations of slow wave cortical EEG rhythms. So I just mentioned that already and explained. So it's deep, deep, deep relaxation. Thalamus is the major gateway for the flow of information toward the cerebral cortex and is the first station at which incoming signals can be blocked by synaptic inhibition during sleep. This mechanism contributes to the shift that the brain undergoes as it changes from an aroused state, open to signals from the outside world, to the closed state of sleep. One major consequence of the shift from waking to sleep is the greatly reduced influence of peripheral sensory input on forebrain neurons. So frontal cortex mainly suppressed. The patterns of activity in the corticothalamic circuits during sleep are instead generated from within. This is most dramatically illustrated in the state of REM sleep, during which dream occurs. I didn't maybe devote enough attention to REM sleep last night, but I think we'll catch up on our knowledge about sleeping brainwaves this time. And now this short paragraph basically gave you the clue of why we see dreams, but we are not moving. And also we have to remember that besides cortical sources, delta generations have been found in many subcortical regions, such as common brainstem. Yes, that's where reticular activating system sits. Various basal ganglion nuclei, and we mentioned basal nuclei, and I'll refresh our understanding of what it does and go into more detail in relation to few more nuclei within basal ganglia, because they will be important for us in understanding the reward system function and these dopaminergic pathways. So they are nuclear accumbens. The abbreviation is NACC, as you can see, ventral pollidium and ventral tegmental area, or VTA. Once again, don't get scared or confused. I'll talk about each of them so it becomes absolutely clear. So I decided to repeat this slide that I showed to you in the very, very beginning when we just started talking about alpha. Once again, I just read a paragraph about thalamus being the key first stop in processing of incoming stimuli. And we remember that it's a gatekeeper that coordinates the timing and distribution and sets the pace for the whole brain. And yes, it is involved in alpha generation, it's involved in theta, in beta, using different, again, excitatory or inhibitory mechanisms, right? Because everything will be just the balance of guess and break, if you like. When we get to delta, thalamic neurons can enter a low threshold burst mode when deeply hypolarized, resulting in thalamic delta activity as it is during sleep. And so here I showed you the kind of switch, how thalamus actually sets this pace through excitation or inhibition. So interesting thing here is that delta and alpha seriously have a lot in common in terms of generation of sleep, because we'll be talking about sleep next. And if you may know already, sleep generation starts with spindles. So it's around 13 hertz periodic activity. And then the spindles eventually slow down. So we know that it starts from alpha, we slow beta, from beta to alpha, from alpha to theta, and eventually get into delta. Those rhythmicities emerge at different levels of polarization of the thalamocortical cells. Alpha rhythms appear when thalamocortical neurons are relatively depolarized. Sleep spindles appear when these cells are relatively hyperpolarized. Delta rhythms emerge at the deepest level of hyperpolarization of thalamocortical neurons. So I'll be repeating myself throughout the presentation, but I hope it's worth doing to help you memorize it better. I wouldn't read the whole slide. It was part of, I think, the second lecture, where I was trying to explain what actually we are measuring by EEG. And we were talking about pyramidal neurons and how they change their charge or membrane potential. Here, I just want you to refresh the basics of it. We start at the resting potential of minus 70 microvolts. And then, of course, we know we have these ion channels which contribute to the charge. So just interplay of positively, negatively charged inflow, outflow, the threshold will change. If it reaches minus 55, then we go into this active depolarization phase, and we reach peak of action potential around plus 30. And then we go, just again, the play out of these channels, you can see them here, in GIF, this video activation takes us into repolarization here. And then as it reaches minus 55, it drops low, and that's where hyperpolarization state is. In the end, we need time to reset back, because causing drop below initial 70 volts resting state to about minus 80 microvolts. This is called hyperpolarization, or after hyperpolarization, followed by rest time repolarization. So we need this rest. And here, just to remind you, the basic flow or decrease of frequency, gradual slowing, right? Because remember, the more aroused we are, the faster frequencies we show. That's why beta is on top. The less aroused we are, the less frequencies are. So we are slowing down. During wake, we have 8 to 13, drowsiness 3 to 7. So you can see slowing down 3 to 7, 1 to 7, and then slow wave sleep. That's what SWS stands for. It will be high in amplitude. And again, remember, the high frequency waves usually are low in amplitude but high in frequency. Slow waves are low in frequency but high in amplitude. And you remember this massive purple bands of delta on the slide where I showed how we see brainwaves with the mind mirror, and I showed you trans or channeling pattern. So that's where delta is over 20, and then it will drop even further in the stage 4 sleep. And in REM, we sit in 4 to 8 hertz frequency with a fairly low amplitude with desynchronized REM sawtooth waves. So maybe another thing I want to mention here, the key, I guess, that we need to remember, besides high frequency, low amplitude in awake states and slow frequency and high amplitude in sleep, in deep sleep states and delta states, we have also to remember that as we slow down, as we go into sleep, the brain waves eventually will be more like, if we are settling or idling, they have a tendency to synchronize. So you'll see more synchronized waves. But as there is some action, some activity, the brainwaves will tend to be desynchronized. So that's, for example, what we see during awake states in beta. And that's what we also see in REM sleep, because there is some kind of information processing going on. So we'll see this desynchronized waves as well. To summarize, I'll show you a 2-minute video on sleep cycles.
Welcome to 2-Minute Neuroscience, where I explain neuroscience topics in 2 minutes or less. In this installment, I will discuss the stages of sleep. Sleep stages are defined based on the measurement of electrical activity in the brain using an electroencephalogram, or EEG. An EEG represents fluctuations in brain electrical activity and voltage as a waveform of variable frequency and amplitude. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine classifies sleep as consisting of 4 stages. The first two stages involve light sleep. When someone begins to fall asleep, they enter stage 1, during which an EEG records low amplitude waves of mixed but mostly high frequencies. Next, the person enters stage 2 sleep. This is characterized by the presence of phenomena on an EEG known as sleep spindles and K-complexes. Sleep spindles are trains of high-frequency waves. The K-complex involves a biphasic wave that stands out from the rest of the EEG. Stage 3 sleep is also known as slow-wave sleep or deep sleep. In stage 3, delta waves, which are low-frequency, high-amplitude waves, make up at least 20% of brain activity. Stage 3 sleep is thought to be especially important to overall restfulness. Next, the sleeper passes rapidly back through stage 2 and stage 1 before entering rapid eye movement or REM sleep. In REM sleep, EEG activity resembles what's seen in stage 1 or restful waking. During REM sleep, the muscles are completely relaxed and limp, but the eyes are moving rapidly. This is the time of sleep when our most vivid dreams are likely to occur. After REM sleep, the person will sometimes awaken briefly, but then will move through the sleep stages again in order. Most people will repeat this cycle 4 to 5 times a night, with each cycle lasting about 90 to 110 minutes.
Okay, so that was it. I just found it interesting that if you remember in Anna Weise's book, High Performance Mind, or in any of her books, you will see the kind of map or that we follow when we meditate, where we can go, which segments and experiences. This is something I found interesting, maybe, and worth exploring, is how we, as you notice, we'll travel through the sleep stages, and we get to stage 3. We rest, a restful sleep, and then we kind of go to stage 2 and 1. 1 being almost the stage pre-sleep when our brains are active, and then we go into REM sleep, and then we go back. So that's kind of going back and forth in there often reminds also non-linear process of deepening, slowing consciousness during meditation, because it's not always just strictly linear and we just go slow. We make 2 steps back and then we come back again to a deeper state, and then we kind of lose it and then we go back again. So key points here that we have to remember: in non-REM sleep, so in deep sleep, the brain activity is offline, allowing stereotyped endogenous activation, whatever is generated inside, to be instantiated in the forebrain. This mechanism could allow recent inputs to be reiterated in a manner that promotes plasticity processes that are associated with memory consolidation. So dreaming was thought to only occur in rapid eye movement sleep, though it is now known that dreaming may also occur during slow wave sleep. And delta wave activity are marked in most people by an apparently unconscious state and the loss of physical awareness, as well as the iteration of information. Delta wave activity has also been reported to aid in the formation of declarative and explicit memory formation. So, as I said, discharge of information, discharge of energy, reset. It's like when your computer gets stuck, the best thing is to restart it. That's something that we do during sleep. And here, I wouldn't go into detail, just to show you. I hope by now you remember the basic brain structures, and they explain the 4 brain processes in normal dreaming. It stands for integration of neurophysiological, neuropsychological, and neuroimaging data. You can see that this main projection starting from 1, which will be reticular activating system in brainstem, which will be communicating to our thalamus and then set the rhythm to the rest of the brain. It will be communicating to motor centers, and then primary sensory cortex in here, cerebellum here. Anyway, the key here is that 7, 8, and 10, as you can see. So the motor cortex will be off, the primary sensory cortex will be off, and then primary visual cortex will be off. That's when we kind of disconnect from the most energy consuming centers in the cortex during sleep. Let's see and deepen our understanding of delta. And here there is information proving that delta clearly is closely connected with our vital biological needs. So we can say instincts, and thus represents regulation of survival mechanisms. So the research shows that delta increases during hunger, during hyperglycemia, so it's low blood sugar, and obviously it will be connected to hunger as well, or just some sugar dysregulation. So delta honestly is closely related to energy management by the body, which energy coming from food and metabolism as well, and sugars play there, as we know, important role. And sugars, as we know, play important role for energy supply for our brain activity, right? So that's where it comes into place, and you may dig more on that to see how we are restoring our energy deposits via there are special sugar kind of molecules formed during sleep that keep us going during the day. So, and obviously delta drops after meal as soon as the need is satisfied. And delta increases during testosterone administration, sexual arousal, and orgasm. So once again, basic needs show up there. You can read more in this article. I placed the sources. I did my best at least to make sure I place them almost on every slide, so you can explore more. And this is an active link. After the presentation, I'll share as usually with you the slides, and if you click the link, it will take you to the full article where you can read more about it. And here we come to delta and reward system, right? Reward system implies we are talking about motivation, what's driving our behavior. And here the key ideas are delta generation is increased during dopamine deficiency, and thus delta becomes part of a reward system and motivation or discrimination of salient stimuli. Delta will be present during reward itself, which is a sensation of pleasure or satisfaction, and that's what dopamine is responsible for. Reward seeking manifesting in various cravings, so it's kind of not just reward itself, but when we are expecting or anticipating it. So for example, cravings, addictive drugs would fall into this category as well. And we'll watch a video next to help you quickly again grasp the idea of how reward system, and especially in relation to delta, operates, these dopamine pathways. And then delta will be present during motivationally relevant or emotionally salient stimuli, the foretaste for an imminent reward. Here is the reference. You can read more yourself. And again, before we jump into the video, I want to remind you of key kind of locations that will be mentioned, because otherwise it will be confusing again. We mentioned basal ganglia, and as it sits here, and you can see it. It's a group of neurons, subcortical nuclei, located deep within the cerebral hemispheres of the brain, where the main part of basal ganglia will be striatum. So major group of basal ganglia nuclei, it's about 10 cubic centimeters. There are other related nuclei. So basal ganglia in general is involved in movement or action. And as we know, movement also involves or is closely connected to behavior, and behavior will be connected to emotions, motivations, and behavior will be organized by cognitive functions. What we'll need for this video today is the basal ganglia have a limbic sector whose components are assigned distinct names. So we'll need nucleus accumbens, central tegmental area. There is considerable evidence that this limbic part plays a central role in reward learning as well as cognition and frontal lobes functioning via the mesolimbic pathway from ventral tegmented area. And again, here is this pathway that will be discussed in the video. Ventral tegmented area will be here, and nucleus accumbens will be here. And you can see how dopamine is traveling. Dopamine will be marked by the blue arrows. So you can see it traveling from VTA to nucleus accumbens and from VTA to prefrontal cortex.
Welcome to 2-Minute Neuroscience, where I simplistically explain neuroscience topics in 2 minutes or less. In this installment, I will discuss the reward system. The reward system refers to a group of structures that are activated whenever we experience something rewarding, like using an addictive drug. When exposed to a rewarding stimulus, the brain responds by increasing release of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Thus, structures that are considered part of the reward system are found along the major dopamine pathways in the brain. The pathway most often associated with reward is the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, which starts in an area of the brainstem called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA. The VTA is one of the principal dopamine-producing areas in the brain, and the mesolimbic dopamine pathway connects it with the nucleus accumbens, a nucleus found in a part of the brain that is strongly associated with motivation and reward, called the ventral striatum. When we use an addictive drug or experience something rewarding, dopamine neurons in the VTA are activated. These neurons project to the nucleus accumbens via the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, and their activation causes dopamine levels in the nucleus accumbens to rise. Another major dopamine pathway, the mesocortical pathway, also originates in the VTA but travels to the cerebral cortex, specifically to the frontal lobes. It is also activated during rewarding experiences and is considered part of the reward system. Because dopamine is released whenever we use an addictive drug, researchers initially thought dopamine must be the neurotransmitter that causes pleasure. More recent research, however, suggests that dopamine activity doesn't correlate exactly with pleasure. For example, dopamine neurons are activated before a reward is actually received, and thus before the pleasure is experienced. For this and other reasons, it is now thought that dopamine has roles other than causing pleasure, such as assigning importance to environmental stimuli associated with rewards and increasing reward seeking. Whatever the precise role of dopamine in reward is, the mesolimbic dopamine pathway is consistently activated during rewarding experiences, leading it to be considered the main structure of the reward system. Regardless, the actual network of brain structures involved in mediating reward is much larger and more complex than just this dopamine pathway, involving many other brain regions and neurotransmitters.
Again, there is a link to YouTube, so you can watch it again. Delta has its own age dynamics. As we know, analysis of the waking EEG of a newly born indicates that delta wave activity is predominant in that age and still appears in the waking EEG cycle of 5-year-olds. So here on the left, I found nice illustrations from some pediatrics website, and you can see the slow waves normal for 2 months old, so mostly delta, rather high amplitude and disorganized, no clear posterior dominant rhythm, PDR. Yes, as we know, babies just sleep. So then I decided to pick 8 years old for comparison. You can see that where they were very slow delta, yes, we can see much faster brainwaves. Plus, note the significant overlay of past frequencies, especially frontally compared to tracing from younger kids. So yes, we can see brain developing, we can see brain being able to process more information, so more energy consuming processes become available. So that's what our consciousness is about. And then you can see posterior dominant rhythm in the back of the head. As we know, that will be alpha rhythm, 9 hertz. So that's when posterior dominant rhythm is clearly visible already. That's when we may start talking about conscious perception, being more adequate perception. And again, posterior dominant rhythm of alpha, and alpha itself stands for inhibition and timing, ability to inhibit, follow relevant stimuli, so better organized behavior, better function. Delta wave activity during slow wave sleep declines during adolescence, with a drop of around 25% reported between the ages of 11 and 14. So as we can see, as we keep growing, delta keeps dropping. Delta waves have been shown to decrease across the lifespan. I guess we grow most when we are little, when we are babies. So that's why we use less brain energy. We use all energy just to grow physical body, and it's just building of our body operations. Later in life, we lose it, have less ability to heal as well and recover. So most decline happens in delta around mid-40s, and that's when we see like, fast decline. By the age of about 75, stage 4 sleep and delta waves may be entirely absent. In addition to a decrease in the incidence of delta waves during slow wave sleep in the elderly, the incidence of temporal delta wave activity is commonly seen in older adults, and incidences also increase with age. Let's just put it this way. Younger, in earlier ages, we have lots of delta, and it's normal because we are just building up. In short, as we get mature, we get posterior rhythm, we get some stability, we get synchronization for the brain, we get enough of fast brain waves, right, for good, efficient brain function. With age later, we slow down. So any slowing, and delta will mean slowing, especially in temporal lobes. As we know, temporal lobes, memory, learning, so all of that slowing will indicate, again, gradual deterioration of cognitive function. And then we have to remember that, of course, all brain waves, they act together, and the global mode oscillations like theta, delta will serve the purpose of integration across diverse cortical areas. So they are expected to interact with the local mode oscillations, which implement specific cognitive operations at the local cortical level. So that means the slower brain waves will be carrying waves, like theta, delta will be carrying waves for fast waves, beta, gamma. So these interactions may show up in correlations between phases and amplitudes of these oscillations. I will talk about phases today and the ways how different frequencies, different brainwaves communicate with each other, because I think at least the basics of it we should know. Delta correlates with beta and gamma in hypervigilant persons. And in this case, they will show high stress index and sensitivity to punishment and anxiety, or highly excitable people in situations with anticipation of positive reward. So yes, and it is quite common, and it was mentioned in Anna Weiss's book as well, that when you can see sometimes this channeling or trance pattern, these people may be just hypervigilant. And if you start digging and asking, you may find that they had difficult childhood and like abusive carers around them. And that's why they develop this hypervigilance to survive, right? Again, whatever we are talking about, you'll see how all the things really correlate with each other, because, survival instinct will be related to delta, and thus building up survival instinct will imply sensitivity and hypervigilance, and highly sensitive people in general will show high delta. So this can be rebalanced, right? I just say, as soon as we start building up alpha, stable alpha, we build up proper inhibition. And if we go into theta, we build up this kind of presence and loving acceptance, and it changes the scenario. But at the same time, it's really hard to, it doesn't mean you won't be able to access delta, you probably will. I'd just say, if you are highly sensitive, be mindful and learn to manage what you have so that it works in your favor. Maybe you can develop healing or psychic abilities instead, and stop being hypervigilant. Know how you can take care of yourselves, understanding of these mechanisms, where this is coming from. And once again, you can read more. Here is the reference. It's the same article, basically. Another interesting fact, females have been shown, so gender dynamics of delta. Females have been shown to have more delta wave activity, and this is true across most mammal species. This discrepancy doesn't become apparent until early adulthood in the 30s or 40s in humans, with males showing greater age-related reductions in delta wave activity than females. So yes, I bet my husband is not the only one frustrated with the fact that I have to sleep more. I need more hours of sleep. Delta and delta alpha relationship will affect impulsivity. So high delta can be associated with impulsive, also with impulsive, aggressive, and antisocial behavior related to intolerance of delayed reward and a high rate of temporal discounting. So impatience, let's think of kids, right? They will obviously have more delta than older kids and then adults. So, oh yes, they are very impulsive and very impatient. Unconstrained urge towards biologically relevant rewarding objects. Yes, kids same, seeking reward. No, it doesn't, nothing matters really. Everything should happen now. Not surprisingly, there is more delta in children because, yeah, there is less alpha, obviously more delta, and this will result in this aggressive antisocial behavior, frustration, and hostility. Because they simply don't have this regulation mechanism in place yet. And of course, it depends on the individual kind of structure, including their neuronal structure and activity. But overall, yes, this is well known that it's hard with children. And there is more delta shown in criminals and antisocial personalities. As many other signs suggest, their brain failed to mature. And as I mentioned before, what might be okay for a child, because this is a normal development evolutionary path, they're just building up. If you fail to build up a proper regulation mechanism in your brain, yes, you basically failed, and what is okay for a child is no longer good for an adult. Same article, you can read more. And then delta and metabolism, and namely we'll be talking about diet. To kind of generalize, we can say that delta helps you to recharge, discharge and recharge. And it's not only about information, which turns into memories, it's also about energy. And when we talk about energy, we have to be talking about food, diet, and sugars. Diets very low in carbohydrates, such as a ketogenic diet, have been shown to increase the amount of delta activity and slow wave sleep in healthy individuals. This is another benefit for going into keto diet from time to time, because here are the numbers if you are interested for non-REM sleep or slow wave sleep, and they both indicators for both categories will be higher for those who went onto this ketogenic diet. And abnormalities, I always, even if we are not working in the clinical field with the mind mirror, it's good to know abnormalities, because when you switch off a function, you kind of better understand what was happening, what the function is, what it was that wasn't so noticeable when everything was working fine. Gray Walter was the first person to use delta waves, regional non-sleep related, to locate brain tumors and lesions causing temporal lobe epilepsy. So basically any slowing in the brain in awake state, especially where you are supposed to have fast brain waves and high energy consuming processes happening, would indicate dysfunction or abnormality. And of course, when there is physical trauma, like tumors and lesions, so these idling areas will pop up. Delta wave disruptions may present as a result of physiological damage, changes in nutrient metabolism. So as I said, it's energy recharge. So if there are metabolic problems, yes, we'll see it there. Chemical alteration, or may also be idiopathic, which means of unknown origin. brain ischemic lesions, parasomnias. Yes, it's all abnormalities of sleep, sleepwalking, sleep talking, night terrors due to disruptions in sleep, Parkinson's disease, disrupted, it means disrupted delta, schizophrenia, reduced, increased during waking time. So it's like you are delusioned in a way because, again, your brain is not working properly. It's too slow to orientate and properly, adequately respond to reality. You have dreaming. Diabetes, again, disrupted sleep. Fibromyalgia, disrupted sleep. Alcoholism, reduced slow wave sleep. And narcolepsy, depression, anxiety, and others. So all of it will be related to delta brain waves. And again, since we are not going to summarize delta next time, because this is the last meeting, let's summarize it. So it's a broad, right? It's a global distribution. It's a slow wave, so it travels far distances, connecting remote locations of the brain with each other. It's diffused, bilateral, widespread. Pathology, trauma, toxicity, neuropathy. Subjective states, deep, dreamless sleep, trance, unconscious. Tasks and behaviors, lethargic, not attentive. Yes, because energy consuming parts of the brain are off, cortex off. The frontal cortical areas, I mean, mainly. Physiological correlates, not moving, low level arousal. Yes, training effects, drowsiness, trance, deeply relaxed. So that was it about delta. And again, questions, I leave it because I really want to cover all the material for today. I think there's a lot of material, but all of it, absolutely all of it is worth knowing. And it's, to me personally, it's ultra interesting and exciting to explore and learn more about our brain. And just to me, most exciting part, understanding all this interconnection, seeing the bigger picture of how things work, because again, when you understand how things work in physiology, including neurophysiology, you'll understand this basic higher order, natural order or creation order. And for me, I'm interested into energy reading, energy work. So kind of all this neurophysiology gives you a good model for understanding of energy processes, how we operate, how to manage your energy. So, and how even in relationships, even in human to human relationships, we can apply same principles. So that's kind of my personal interest. Okay, gamma. Here you see the slide, how we see gamma with the mind mirror. And gamma is displayed in pink and sits on the very top because it's the fastest brainwave category that we measure, 100 to 30 hertz. So it sits above beta. The patterns that we see with the gamma on top. So if we have awakened mind with gamma on top, we call it superconscious mind. And if we see a gamma on top of evolved mind, we call it universal consciousness. So we associate gamma with cosmic consciousness, doorway to higher brain function and mystical experience. But it doesn't mean that you can't have mystical experience without gamma. Heightened sensory perception, profound intuitive and healing abilities. Note, though gamma is related to higher states and spiritual experience, it's not necessary. You can still experience and do it without gamma. Yes, that's what I just said. So let's see if anything of it is true or how we can really prove this is true with the modern research. Before, again, there will be some theory, but it's important theory. Let's talk, this is an insert, so it means we kind of stepped aside from our main line of communication, main topic, but it's all related, obviously. So evolutionary perspective of the brain. Remember on the very first lecture, we talked about reptilian, limbic, and a human brain. And now we'll look at evolution from the perspective of dominant rhythms as a marker for behavior and main drive, and how they evolve, how they kind of change during evolution. So lower vertebrates, they have internal motivational drives of delta. So they're purely living by the instinct. And I mean, partially it does relate. The reptilians are not vertebrates. I mean, instinct, fear, that's the main driving force. Lower mammals, emotional reactions and learning of theta. So again, we can see the dominant rhythm is changing, and we kind of advance because emotional reactions, mammals, they show, okay, no, I can't really say feelings, but they feed their babies and they develop different relationship, at least with their baby. They show attachment. So that's the kind of main difference, as I understand it. And then humans, they show and reveal conscious behavior of alpha. So you can see that alpha becomes a key indicator of evolution of species. To remind you, it stands for ability to inhibit immediate impulsive motor reactions. So this aggressive animal behavior go into fight mode and kill, and focus on relevant stimuli via attention by increasing signal to noise ratio. So that helps us to stay more focused and direct our behavior. Activate mechanisms of mental representation of events, objects, and working memory. So again, abstract thinking probably wouldn't be possible without alpha. So we wouldn't operate in our mind with objects and events. We would be more like animals. We just know about what we see in the moment, more like this. Also, the last and the most to develop is prefrontal cortex, which, as we know, is biggest in humans. Yes, here we can see that definitely that's the biggest, related to ability to sustain and inhibit control behavior, impulses, irritability, hyperactivity. So prefrontal cortex becomes in charge of alpha maintenance over low frequency modes. EEG data show that the frontoparietal interactions within the alpha oscillatory range are involved in executive control of complex cognitive functions. Moreover, high anterior posterior alpha coherence was observed in adults than children. So again, we'll be talking about coherence today, because there are these abstract words that kind of remain a mystery or difficult to grasp and understand, and I want to make it clear to myself and others. So the more evolved brain will show more coherence, so it will be better organized, again in just simple words, and more synchrony. So the timing is synchrony, the resonance is more, so there is more kind of power and more influence. Compare humans to reptilians, for example, since integration over larger scale is required as the brain is simply bigger, less dense and more modular structurally and functionally. So obviously, yes, the brain gets bigger. It requires for integration of larger scale integration. And integration implies that different parts of the brain should be able to communicate with each other, preferably via low-cost energy mechanisms. And this will be the mechanism of coupling or binding. And again, we'll talk about it later because it's directly related to gamma. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to understand properly its mechanisms. So I just said that the bigger the brain, there is more interdependence of cortical rhythms. So if, again, global mode oscillations serve the purpose of integration across diverse cortical areas, they are expected to interact with the local mode oscillations, which implement specific cognitive operations at the local cortical level. So I just mentioned today already, we have slower theta, delta, and we have faster beta, gamma, and mainly delta and theta, they will be the carriers for faster brainwaves, and beta gamma will be information components. And again, if we step back and talk about it metaphorically, we'll see that theta delta, as Freud put it, will be this energy component, so to say, and beta gamma will be information component. And if we use beta gamma as a metaphor for our separate self, gamma is separate story really. So beta is our conscious mind, which sees itself separate and tries to preserve its status quo and hold on to what it knows, etc., etc. When we become very mental, locked up in our minds, we don't have energy for our actions. So once again, just through metaphors, you can better understand how we create the world around us, how we see what we see, and how we can manifest what we want to manifest, how we can create our reality, or at least on a basic mundane level, get the energy for everyday life, for our big projects and big dreams, make our dreams come true. So again, back to main material. Global scale frequencies, slow frequencies will interact with fast frequencies. So what interactions may show up in correlation between phases or amplitudes of these oscillations, because phase and amplitude will be the mechanism of communication, right? Going into sync, going into resonance, showing similarities, right? So let's see the examples. So theta and gamma will work together in memory formation and retrieval from long-term memory. And talking about gamma, I'll speak about this in more detail. Delta and theta slow and beta gamma fast. We just talked about it. It showed up in hypervigilant persons, people. Yeah, just talked about it. Then third, alpha, beta, and gamma, all three will be involved in visual processing. And let's face it, visual perception makes up of about like 80% of our perception. And it's very common, like it's the dominant channel, visual channel is dominant. So it's extremely important for humans. And it's extremely complex at the same time, because there will be around 30 areas in the brain involved in visual processing. So obviously we'll need more frequencies to make it happen. It's very energy consuming process. That's why in meditation, closing the eyes, you kind of release some energy for internal exploration and observation, etc. So alpha, upper alpha mainly, and theta take part in memory encoding, retention, and retrieval. And we were talking about it when we were talking about alpha. Alpha and theta delta are used in inhibition, healthy interaction with the world. So if there is not enough alpha, and we just talked about it, again, there is less ability to inhibit, and there will be problems with managing social interactions and low anxiety, etc., etc. So basically, again, if delta theta stands for energy, and this energy is like a wild horse, and you have nobody to ride that horse, you don't have the mechanism, you'll go off the rails, and that's what happens. Okay, again, here is a reference for the article for you to read more if you want. And we'll go to maybe boring, but very key things in communication between, or interaction between different frequencies, different brainwave categories, because we are talking about integration and communication. We have a big brain, so we need somehow to allow this integration and communication. So what is phase? Because often you'll see this. So when we talk about a wave or oscillation, phase will be this 300 degrees period or cycle of the wave before it starts repeating itself again. And here on the left, there is this picture moving that will help you to understand. Basically, it's if you see the static lower picture, here you will see the wave period, right? So it's the wave, just the pattern before it starts repeating itself again. Two waves are said to be, phase relates to the orientation of two waves in relation to each other over time, namely closeness of peaks and valleys in two signals. So two waves are said to be in phase or phase locked when their peaks and troughs are aligned. So when waveforms between two locations are not aligned, the waves are not in phase. Phase indicates speed of communication. So high speed of communication, you may think it's good, but it's not always good. The phase difference between two locations is the delay between the two waveforms. This is also called the angle. Sometimes delays are required for integration and evaluation of information. That means simply each process should take its time. Like, some people, they speak and say something before they think, and that causes lots of trouble. So that would be an example of no delay or no enough time given for processing of information or assessment of what should come out of your mouth. In abnormal cases of delay, there could be stuttering or word grasping, etc. So again, though we are talking about these physiological processes, the electricity or waves of this, really, I always like to take some learning out of everything. So the learning is, even in life, just remember, this is nature and there should be time given to every process to unfold. I mean, we are talking about milliseconds in terms of brain, but really for anything unfolding in your life, you should be patient and just trust and give it enough time. And then, since we were talking about phases, one of the main mechanisms mediating the relationship between slow activity and fast activity is cross-frequency coupling or nesting. As I said, slow waves will be energy waves, and faster waves will be more like information, coding information. Cross-frequency coupling is characterized by transient synchronous interaction between different frequency bands, hierarchy of mutually interacting oscillations that facilitate multi-scale integration of brain activity across brain regions, including networks. Obviously, for our brain to operate efficiently, we need to have some flexibility. And we were looking at the anatomical structure, but we also have to remember that the resources in whatever form, even including brainwave or energy form, electrical form, should be put together, assembled for a function, and then be able to, because brain and frequencies, brain parts and frequencies, they can be multifunctional, so they should be able to disengage and be able to be involved into new operations and other functions, other networks. So face-to-face interactions, face-to-power interactions are the most common form of cross-frequency coupling, but other forms of interactions exist. So here on the left, you will see different types of cross-frequency coupling. You can see, so it's at phase to power. And let's see from the very top. So power to power, you can see how B is related to A, right? As the power goes down here, the power will go down here. Phase to phase, yes, you can see that not necessarily each throw and pick a line, but you can clearly see they work together in pattern, right? It's just the rhythm for one is a bit slower than the rhythm for another. Phase to power, yes, same. So you can see they're kind of locked in phase, and the power slightly decreases when the power decreases here. Phase to frequency, etc., etc. I wouldn't go into detail because there is too much, otherwise there will be overload. But here, a description, if you want to learn more, will tell you all the details of what you see. Recent studies indicate that corticothalamic and septohippocampal loop systems are cross-frequency phase locked as part of a dynamic of information processing. So that's why you have to understand that corticothalamic mechanism will involve this, and that will be relevant to gamma, and septohippocampal, gamma and alpha. Septohippocampal loop, again, that's how memories are formed, how we pass this information and encode it for long-term storage. Again, I'll repeat myself many, many times today to make it clear. another insert about coherence and synchrony. So coherence comes from the word like stick together well. And it stands for order or organization. So the quality of being logical, consistent, meaningful, forming a unified whole. I mean, again, another word could be well organized, orderly. So coherence measures the average time two locations share the same phase, which would correspond to amount of time communicated and information shared. There is more phase stability. That means there is more time spent in communication and more information shared. Peaks and valleys do not have to line up. There could be a gap, delay, or angle. If phase delay is consistent, coherence is still high. So we are not talking about exact like lineup of peaks and valleys. High coherence may not mean direct connectivity of sites. We have to remember it could be over the third party. So for example, thalamus will be that third party location for cortical locations, and example could be television for people. So all receive shared information via third party source. People are not communicating directly, they're watching the same program on TV, so they're sharing the same information via this television, or in our case, thalamus. Coherence measures with a correlation under 2 are said to be hypocoherent, or which means low. There is low coherence, and measures between 0.3 to 0.5 are said to be moderately coherent, and above 0.5 is hypercoherent. So you may ask, is it always good to have high coherence and low coherence? I should say not really. It's about balance. There's golden mean to everything, because when obviously family members don't communicate, that's a sick family. So if parts of your brain that need to communicate, say for visual processing, which is extremely complex, you wouldn't get complete picture. You'll be in trouble of putting pieces of the puzzle together. If you are, so that was hypocoherence, low coherence. On the other hand, extreme coherence, high coherence could mean overdependence, when you need different parts of the brain to have some functional differentiation and perform their specific function, but they constantly sharing time and energy with each other. That makes them very inefficient. So you can't say have players in the football team all performing one function. I mean, they clearly have to be differentiated, so otherwise there would be no game. So there is same story with coherence. Synchrony. Synchrony means simultaneous, the simplest word, or in sync, in resonance or paced in the same fashion. So it's a specific case of coherence when peaks and valleys are synchronized. So typical example would be, we really need, because alpha is the main pacer, alpha synchrony training is the one for peak performance and mental fitness. And as an illustration, because I wanted to find some good illustration of coherence to show you, I discovered these illustrations in one blog spot in relation to transcendental meditation. The one in the back shows non-meditators EEG, and you can see that you can't see really that the waves in different locations are kind of talking to each other much, because it's very disorganized. You can't clearly see that they're working in the same rhythm. And below you see the recordings during the practice of transcendental meditation. You can see that lines kind of are moving up and down together. So the brains are no longer scattered, but in phase. So indicating that neurons are firing in harmony with the same frequency of alpha 1. So that's what they put, and they mark the segments where it's more obviously seen. Okay, so here I picked this slide for you from what I prepared for our Mind Mirror portal when we were developing the portal, and we were about to add the features pack. Just to mention that we do measure coherence with the Mind Mirror as well. And there are the graphs, these charts that you can see on the screen now. Coherent spectral array plot shows the coherence of the two brain hemispheres over time. The x-axis on the left is a scale of frequencies ranging from 0 to 80. The y-axis across the bottom is a time plot. We use brainwave coherence as a synonym of bilateral symmetry because obviously left and right hemisphere have to be in sync and to be able to share information with each other. It's not just one side of the brain. When brainwave coherence increases, neurons amplify their power and activate other neurons, neural clusters, neural circuits. The result is a more coherent, noise-free, more powerful, influential flow of information and energy, which enhances communication networks within the brain, nervous system, and cells. Okay, so each of the yellow dots of the plot indicates a second when the left and right hemispheres are 95% correlated. This is the default setting, but you may change this percentage, or correlating to the individual percentage, which you may set yourself. So the high density of dots around the frequency of electricity in your country may indicate electrical noise artifact. So yes, if you see some abnormal kind of clusters around the electrical frequency in your country, this is just the... And then correlation coefficient shows which frequencies show the greatest interhemispheric coherence. The frequency scale is across the bottom of the window. See below that, so the below are the benefits of training coherence for different brainwave categories. So beta coherence improves conflict monitoring, empathy, equanimity, and diminishes reactivity. Alpha coherence, synchronous alpha, that is symmetrical and in phase, is associated with improved memory, better mood, clarity, and heightened creativity, relates to somatosensory attention and mindfulness. Theta coherence is associated with internal mental processes, feelings of peace, clarity, and contentment. Gamma coherence is associated with selflessness, non-judgmental awareness, loving kindness, and compassion. And when meditators are experiencing higher states of consciousness, coherence readings may not be useful. For example, a meditator might produce a left brain awakened mind pattern, right brain evolved mind, which pattern could be asymmetrical and thus falsely appear to be incoherent. I wouldn't go into more detail, just you can read, I'll leave you the slides, and I'll go straight to gamma because we have a lot to cover. Gamma, so this is least known because just the technology was developed recently, and that means there was more research done, say, on alpha and beta and theta rather than gamma, on other rhythms than gamma. So it's least known for that reason as well. And another thing is gamma is low voltage, high frequency bandwidth, which can be mixed up with the muscle or electrical noise. Gamma ranges normally are seen 30 Hertz plus, but the ranges themselves, you could see anything, 30 to 100, 30 to 80, 30 to 140. So there is no consistency there. Gamma is most prominent during alert, attentive wakefulness. Sometimes gamma even is seen as fast beta, and in textbooks it will be placed just as a couple of extra paragraphs in the main chapter about beta. Gamma is dependent upon the activity in slower frequencies, such as the infraslow potential and theta, to which it is nested via cross-frequency coupling. So now it becomes kind of clearer to you what's happening. And here on the left, I decided to get this picture out to show you that, you remember we have raw EEG, and then by Fourier transform, it's kind of dissected into these various frequency groups and carrier waves, these energy waves, delta, theta, alpha, and information waves, beta and gamma. So I wanted to memorize this picture because I think it's important. Gamma is highly modified by sensory input and internal processes, including attention and working memory. Attention, working memory, so it means under task, so under high cognitive pressure and demands, gamma will go high. And then in meditation, when you focus your attention, concentration will bring gamma high as well. So origin, gamma is spontaneously generated in neural networks. Again, talking about gamma, we have to remember it's not just individual cells, because in other frequencies, there could be individual cells generating the rhythm and passing it to each other. With gamma, these are networks, because gamma is so fast. It's the whole network sustaining the rhythm rather than the individual cell. Gamma will be connected to, again, thalamocortical projections, and because it's the highly aroused state, it will be related to reticular activating system, which regulates your alertness and arousal in general. It will be related to thalamocerebellum cortex loop and hippocampus cortex as well. And again, I'll talk about it in more detail later. I won't stop here now. So a function of gamma will be integration of sensory representations, cognitive functions of perception or attentional awareness, sensory motor integration, working memory and learning, and often gamma will be associated with consciousness, namely phenomenological perception or enhanced perceptual awareness and brain plasticity. So right now, these are just general words for you, and let's explore. And I forgot to mention, here is another picture which shows that, okay, here is the infraslow wave. Infraslow will be the wave even below the delta frequency. So it's kind of the direct current of just metabolic activity, just underlying current of the nervous system. That's how they explain it. And then you can see that on this very slow wave, there will be theta wave, this 4-7 hertz or 4-7 cycles a second. And then gamma will be this fast waves sitting on top of theta waves, which usually by a fraction of 7, gamma will be helping to code the memories in this fashion. So we'll talk about it in more detail. And before we go, in one word, because you should know it by now, hippocampus is part of the limbic system, responsible for memory consolidation, short-term, long-term memory formation, spatial navigation, learning, and neuroplasticity. And cerebellum, I probably didn't pay enough attention during previous lectures, so in one word, very quickly, it's that small brain in the very kind of below of the cortex and behind the brainstem, where the spinal cord meets the brain. And it also has 2 little hemispheres. So it's responsible mainly for balance, posture, tone of the body, fine-tuning and coordination of movements. So when you're riding bicycle, playing musical instrument, cerebellum is at work, and it coordinates function of different groups of muscles. And since we'll be talking about coordination today and integration, we need to kind of keep in mind cerebellum. Gamma, in relation to conscious attention or awareness, right? How do we become consciously aware of something? Gamma waves relate to neural synchrony mechanism for conscious attention and awareness. The proposed answer lies in a wave that, originating in the thalamus, sweeps the brain from front to back 40 times per second, drawing different neuronal circuits into sync with the percept, and thereby bringing the percept into the attentional foreground. If the thalamus is damaged even a little bit, this wave stops. Conscious awareness doesn't form, and the patient slips into profound coma. Thus, the claim is that when all these neuronal clusters oscillate together during these transient periods of synchronized firing, they help bring up memories and associations from the visual percept to other notions. This brings a distributed matrix of cognitive processes together to generate a coherent, concerted cognitive act such as perception. Now I can see a little wallaby out there. This had led to theories that gamma waves are associated with solving the binding problem. So in my own words, let's just keep it really simple. Gamma is about networks. So there will be these neural pathways sweeping from front to back and synchronizing different parts of the brain to make sure that different puzzles related to what we see are put together, right? So that we know what we are actually seeing, and the stimuli kind of passes the threshold of being consciously recognized, right? And again, binding problem, I'll be talking about it in more detail. So gamma, coherent and unified perception. So I'll just be elaborating about this more and more. Gamma waves may participate in the formation of coherent unified perception, also known as the problem of combination in the binding problem, due to the apparent synchronization of neural firing rates across distinct brain regions. A number of experiments supports a hypothesis that the basis for consciousness is this 40 Hz oscillation seen in wakefulness and in dreaming, and is proposed to be a correlate of cognition resulting from this resonance in thalamocortical loop, thalamocortical specific and non-specific loops. So specific will provide content for cognition, and non-specific loops will provide temporal binding required for the unity of cognitive experience. So temporal binding, again, when we talk about synchrony, we talk about pace, we talk about time, and temporal is just derived from time. Pace. Lead article by Engel, and there is a reference to this article as well, active reference that you can click and read it, argues that temporal synchrony is the basis for consciousness and defines the gamma wave hypothesis, which is about synchronization of neuronal discharges. When they go in sync, they integrate neurons into cell assemblies or groups, and this process underlies the selection of perceptually and behaviorally relevant information. On the left, I put the picture where you can see kind of rough scheme of our visual perception. So you can see that there is a woman and a cat, and you can see that the woman and the cat as different objects are being coded separately in separate assemblies. So that's like firing, let's say, of neurons. And assembly 1 will represent not just the contour, but the fill out kind of dots for the woman. And the assembly 2 will represent the same for the cat. So this is very, very roughly, but we'll see more information on the next slides. So we'll be talking about temporal binding. So how they bind, how they lock, how they synchronize, and why we need it. So some sort of binding, we talked our brain is big. So the cortex is big, and there are lots of representation areas with different functions. How do they come together in networks to perform their function? So some mechanism is required, and this is this binding mechanism to encode and retrieve information in these neural networks. Let's see. Cognitive processing is complex, distributed across many network elements, cortical and subcortical, and systems, for example, sensory and motor. Then, perception of action in a complex environment usually requires the parallel processing of information related to different objects and events to be kept apart, which means structured representation for sensory segmentation and goal-directed behavior. So also ability to choose relevant stimuli to avoid confusion and erroneous conjunction. So just visual perception example on the previous slide, I think will help you to understand. We have to encode separate objects separately. Binding should be specific yet flexible for systematicity and productivity of cognitive processes. Oh yes, I just said networks can use the same parts, the same pathway, so they have to be able to be flexible enough to engage and disengage and switch. context-dependent selection of information from a richer set of data for further processing of subsets of information. So we have to be able to differentiate kind of subsets of information or sub-blocks that, oh, this is me, and this is the background, or different kind of subsets within the background. And it's not only, I'm talking about like using visual example, but you may use it in like more complex things like discrimination of salient stimuli. Conscious recall of memory contents requires binding of distributed information stored in spatially separate cortical areas, hemispheres, or areas of the same lobe. Again, so when we recall information, it will depend on how the information was coded. So if it was coded in a nicely orderly manner, then it means it would be easier for us to recall it. That's why I'm always struggling with poorly structured textbooks, because it's really hard to, or lectures, it's really hard to recall and build the necessary links. Then sensory awareness. Only bound neuronal activity can enter short-term memory and become available for access to phenomenal consciousness, which also implies not just low-level like holistic character of objects, but also ability to differentiate self or object versus a global world or background scene. It implies ability to achieve coherence of the contents of mental states and establish relationships between representational structures. So you can understand phenomenal consciousness. I mean, it is that we like consciousness of being aware of something. We are conscious that we feel this. We are aware that that's what it is. It is that moment of recognition. Yeah, there should be this bound neuronal activity. Without this, it wouldn't pass our threshold kind of recognition, awareness, and consciousness. So again, for something to be selected for perception, neurons have to be strongly synchronized and bound into assemblies. It's condition for awareness. Synchrony is associated with gamma range oscillations 30 to 80 Hertz, and gamma increases for dominant stimuli, decreases for suppressed. Gamma increases during vigilance. So let's say this bound neuronal activity largely is represented by gamma synchrony, synchronous gamma activity, because these are these networks that fire together and wire together things for the memory. Plus, it not only makes us aware of what is there, it signifies or discriminates what's relevant, what's dominant. And in this way, gamma networks, they work similar to alpha, because alpha discriminates the stimulus and inhibits what's irrelevant and allows for excitation to happen for what's relevant. So gamma can be a type of enhancer for alpha. And even in my other lectures, I was talking about gamma as a booster. It is kind of a booster to both alpha and beta frequencies. And then gamma increases during vigilance, dependent on reticular activating system. So as I said, as being the highest frequency, it will be the highest arousal. And of course, we need to be highly aroused when we need to perform under cognitive task, or in the situation of danger. So you will see how gamma will relate to vigilance. So synchronous firing in gamma band, and we have to mark that precision is in the milliseconds range. So you have to understand how it's high speed and very precise timing. And this is the key to bind multiple features of an object, which are coded in distributed manner, single percept, structured representation, sequences, which also includes, by the way, events causality in the brain, and is modulated by cognitive process such as attention and memory. For gamma band oscillations, at least 200 milliseconds are required for the perception of a simple sensory stimulus. Again, it takes a cycle, it takes its time. Synchronization is increased for dominant stimulus, suppressed for irrelevant, and during aroused and focused attention. So I talked about it already. Here we see another slide. I already mentioned it before, so I wouldn't devote too much attention to it. Here we are talking about gamma and theta in memory encoding. So they both support memory formation. And there is even a coding scheme that is used in hippocampus to organize the readout from long-term memory and working memory operations. Analysis of synchronization between cortical theta and gamma oscillations in humans revealed a task-dependent modulation of gamma activity by the entrained theta cycle, a mechanism potentially related to memory encoding and retrieval. You can see that there will be a wave, and then there will be sequences encoded, and the wave itself will be theta, but the sequences encoded, they will be gamma. Each cycle for sequence of gamma will be like recording a certain trait or attribute. So something like that in a very vague way. There are different gamma types. First, we have to know there is spontaneous gamma that is just spontaneously generated in resonant thalamocortical circuits. And then there is steady state gamma. For example, it can be induced by light signals which has the same frequency as a gamma, or clicking sound, which will be in the same frequencies of around 40 hertz. Evoked gamma, it means a gamma increase in the onset to a sensory stimulus, as I said, under task or the cognitive task, or under increased sensory processing requirements, gamma will go up. And here a good example will be my work with mediums, like to move the table or to channel. We could see gamma bursts, so gamma will become active, like they switch the booster on for extra sensory perception and extra cognitive processing. So induced gamma, it just spontaneous gamma which has been increased in response to a sensory stimulus, but it's not locked to the time of the stimulus, so it's not like evoked gamma. It is thought, induced gamma is thought to reflect the binding of stimulus features held in multiple networks to create a neural representation. So I hope what I'm talking about now becomes clearer and clearer. The increase in gamma amplitude from spontaneous activity to the higher levels of induced gamma is thought to reflect memory matching utilization model. Again, read about it more. I guess it's enough for us to remember simply that gamma helps to bring the kind of unified percept into place, form this gestalt of the object or event, and help code this, not just represent it in our awareness and consciousness, but help code it into memory. So for example, gamma increases in brain networks underpinning the neural representation of faces when a familiar face is seen, but not when an unfamiliar face is seen. The greater the familiarity of the face, the stronger the gamma activity. So again, I guess here salience comes into place, where we are able to discriminate and recognize. So is it something salient? Normally the faces that we know will, of course, obviously, will mean to us more, will be more important to us, and that will increase gamma. And of course, gamma, as we already know, it brings more coherence. I already showed you the example with transcendental meditation, which brings more coherence into place in general. And when we talk about synchrony and coherence, we imply that, it will lead to gamma. So high amplitude gamma wave synchrony can be self-induced via meditation, and long-term practitioners of meditation, such as Tibetan Buddhist monks, exhibit both increased gamma band activity at baseline. So this is the chart. Controls will be in blue, practitioners of Buddhist monks will be in orange, and baseline, it's the first basically the first two indicators, and you clearly see at baseline, practitioners already show high level, because obviously when I was reading an article, they explained that you don't meditate for the purpose of meditation, you meditate to be able to bring meditative state and its benefits into your everyday life, which means adjust or adapt or modify your baseline, upgrade your baselines. That's what we see here. Baseline is upgraded. And then as during the experiment, you could see significant increases in gamma synchrony during meditation as determined by scalp EEG. This it will be just beginning and during, because they were doing pre-exercise and the meditation itself. And you can clearly see how big the difference is. fMRI on the same monks revealed greater activation of right insular cortex. So that's why I was bringing this insular slide and caudate nucleus during meditation. So insula is the one responsible for sensory processing, for better coordination of motor functions, motor control, self-awareness, decision-making, homeostasis, immune system regulation, emotion, empathy. So you can see that by meditation, we affect the functions of insula, and the functions of insula implies we become more sensitive, right? So psychic skills develop, we become more coordinated, motor function improves, we become more self-aware, we make better decisions, we improve our immune functioning, we are calmer emotionally and are able to express more empathy, and we have a better regulation between emotions and body. So we regulate our desires better in terms of cravings. So everything starts making more sense and becomes more enjoyable. So caudate, and then another part of basal ganglia, another group of nuclei, another part of striatum called caudate nucleus, which means having a tail or tail-like appendage, is involved into voluntary skeletal movement. That's why it participates in planning the execution of movement, but also in learning, memory, reward, motivation, emotion, and romantic interaction. So you better perform in motor, in movement, better coordination, better learning, memory. You are healthier in terms of your reward system functioning, so you're less prone to addictions. Motivation, emotion fall in the same category, so you're more under control, better self-regulation, and romantic interaction. Interesting. And gamma abnormalities, again, we have to remember that sometimes abnormalities help you to bring more light on the main function. So let's see, this is a table and you can see the arrows showing whether there will be more gamma or less gamma in the mentioned disorders. So in epilepsy, obviously, gamma will be too high. Gamma means high arousal and it's high speed. And if it's not inhibited in time, yeah, it will cause epilepsy. Then what else? ADHD. So it will be evoked gamma, so it will be too high gamma, too much excitation in place. Then hallucinations, spontaneous EEG phase locking. So there will be certain things processed as real because of gamma activation, because gamma gives us that sense of what's real, what's not, and conscious awareness. So it's messed up. This mechanism is messed up. Schizophrenia, it will bring, again, high gamma, in some cases, low gamma in other cases, and I'll talk about it on the next slide, because for some symptoms it will be too high, for other symptoms too low. Alzheimer's, low. Aging, of course, aging, I just described, we are slowing down. The functions are not like developing or building up like in early ages, they are dropping out. Autism, it's of course low. low induced because there's lower response to external stimuli, lower cognitive functions in place, low sensory processing. Migraine may show low gamma. Stroke slows, obviously brain injury slows, so slowing. Apparently gamma, like we looked at dopamine pathways with delta when we were learning about reward system, with gamma, dopamine levels also play an important role. And in certain disorders, they relate to different symptoms of these disorders. So, for example, high dopamine levels will indicate high gamma and bring positive symptoms, like the hallucinations as positive symptoms of schizophrenia. And low dopamine levels will mean low gamma and negative symptoms, negative cognitive performance and ability to recognize what is real and build the meaningful sequences of, what's real, what's relevant, what's important, and process information in a good, efficient, meaningful way, which implies high cognitive functions. Too much gamma in epilepsy and positive symptoms in schizophrenia. In here, they show these waves and showing that waves are generated even without sensory input. So obviously, fake, we see something which is fake, but we see it and perceive it because gamma is about perception as real. This is a very interesting chart which shows hypothetical relationship between gamma activity, brain regions, and pathology. And even in healthy subjects, gamma activity shows a significant inter-individual variation that correlates with cognitive parameters. In ADHD patients, attention disorder, it is slightly higher. For schizophrenia, a subgrouping in positive and negative symptoms is well documented, and it has been suggested that both groups can be differentiated by increased positive symptoms, especially hallucination, or reduced negative symptoms of gamma activity. Alzheimer's disease is accompanied with a reduction of gamma synchronization. An extremely high level of gamma activity may lead to epileptic seizures through the hyperexcitation of the cortex. Accordingly, states with high gamma activity contain a risk for such seizures. So you can see, and then the origin of gamma cortical and limbic. There is a more, of course, much more to read and learn about gamma. Here is a good article, very detailed, very technical, but if you want to learn about binding and perception, and in general more dig into gamma with lots of chemistry in it, this is the article to read. And since we are not going to have any other meeting summarizing this, though I internally feel that it would be really lovely, because I didn't allow for enough time to kind of maybe invite everybody to watch again and repeat, or at least read again the presentations, and then do some thinking about what we say about brainwave categories in the mind mirror theory, and how this corresponds with the scientific findings that I presented in my series. Because I did make lots of examples, but I didn't kind of structure or summarize it, say on one slide saying, we say this and here is the study, we say this and here is the study. Or I just want to invite you to not just get stuck in words and attach to words and repeat words like a parrot or a monkey, but develop your own inner vision, kind of dimensional, this representation of what brainwaves stand for and how they operate. So, okay, summarizing, repeating. Another word for sometimes for gamma is a shear rhythm. And again, you see here gamma frequencies are again different. It's 35 to 45 hertz. So don't be surprised, there is no consistency in the data among different authors and books, and yeah, it's a bit disorganized. So gamma, of course, is associated with cognitive binding. So reported on 6-7 bursts per second. I can't even remember what this stands for right now here. Lutz found sustained gamma in advanced meditators, and yes, we just revised the slide devoted for the findings, main findings from that article by Lutz. Short bursts require wide 35-45 Hertz filters to detect. Again, let me remind you that gamma is very high frequency, and it's very fast but low amplitude. So again, there is first a need in very advanced technology, sensitive technology enough with high filters to detect these high oscillations, like low amplitudes, low power, low volume. They're not very loud, but they're very fast. So that's the complexity of it. And then they fall into the same frequency range with electricity. So there could be lots of noise, electromagnetic noise there. Then they fall into the same frequency with EMG or muscle artifacts. So they may fall into the muscle noise and movement noise. And that's the complexity. Plus there is, again, this enough 200 millisecond cycle required for it to perform and kind of show the result, as we just learned. So others define 25 to 30 Hertz, 20 to 64 Hertz. Okay, these are just too deep, like too much of a detail. It's very localized, but again, these are networks. So networks that come into place and then form new networks for this or that function. And we were talking about just synchronization of not just left and right. And that's what we normally measure with the mind mirror. Let me explain why, because synchrony between sites is one story, but since we always have the same sites present, so we will be basically measuring synchrony of brainwave categories in the temporal occipital, so in the back of the brain, in between left and right hemisphere. But in other world where the locations could be different, you'll measure synchrony simply between different locations wherever you place your electrodes. And of course, it is implied that left-right hemisphere needs to communicate, and relevant sub areas of the cortex need to be involved depending on the function, visual, cortical, or visual, auditory, or say motor function for movement, for muscle coordination. Then physiological correlates, information-rich tasks, integration of new material. Oh, that's what we were talking about. It's if I were to choose again the keywords for gamma, I would say it's a very focused attention. High attention will help to select relevant stimuli. It will help to create enough sensory awareness and break the threshold of perception, and also bind different features into one single concept. So it's integration and it's coordination. So all of this falls into gamma. So these are the books that I used today. So the main material was coming from this book, Functional Neuromarkers for Psychiatry. Certain things were coming from Thomas Kalura books. And here are the main articles or websites that I used. Like this Knyazhev article is really good to learn about all brainwave categories. They give enough kind of summarized information. Engel et al. Temporal binding, consciousness will talk about binding and gamma. Remember, it's again gamma band, more about gamma. Human EEG, gamma oscillations in disorders, yes, more about gamma, and meditators. So that was it for today. And I say again, big thank you for your attention, big thank you for your patience and loyalty to some extent. It was the 4th program. I didn't expect initially for this program to take that long, but there is so much material to cover. And again, this is just my current level of understanding and my current level of knowledge. By this moment in time, I managed to come across just these sources of information and this amount of information. So let's hope if there is interest and time space given, we could continue this program maybe each year, maybe at least for one meeting a year, just to refresh our understanding of what humanity knows about different brainwave categories and where they originate, how energy is managed within our brains, and why we are who we are, why we perform the way we perform. If you have any feedback at any time, send me an email, say this is an interesting article I come across, or I misunderstood maybe something and you know it better than me, so you can always correct me. So I invite you to stay critical, see beyond words, and try to make your own mind of what is what.